There's a little person inside of your phone. I don't know how you get them in there. Will it make a noise? If it makes a noise, do you hear?
If he makes a noise, we'll hear it on here.
We will? Oh. Okay. There's a low battery on that, so you have it plugged in. Okay. Not sure why it's low. Probably wasn't plugged in. That's what happens. So this evening's Dharma talk, because I couldn't think of what to talk about, I've titled Mountains and Rivers 3. So Mountains and Rivers just means that I'm going to sit here and you guys can ask questions. Other than financial, well, I won't answer those, but I will try to answer other ones. And it was really helpful because sometimes by doing it this way, we start in going right into the very thing that you're wondering about or curious about or something. So questions are very helpful to everyone, and especially to me.
Do we know where consciousness comes from?
So it tends to have a, depending on when it's tied in with one of the sense fields, then we have a feeling that it's arriving or departing or something like that. But consciousness itself, it doesn't actually have an identity. And consciousness, and from the way it looks, so this is the way it looks, I have no proof, doesn't belong to anyone and has no location. And to some extent, and to every extent, it doesn't have need of existence the way a physical form does. So it is together with it, it's with it, but it's not the same as that. Further question about that, Michelle? Okay. Anyone else? Shoto?
How does permission work when we ask a question? How do you know how deep we can go with a question and answer?
You mean like some of those ridiculous questions you ask me?
Especially.
No. You go ahead and I'll stop you if it gets too silly. So I don't know. I don't think there's some kind of a standard or anything. If you start doing that, then everybody starts looking for right and wrong and up and down, back and forth. And it's just there's enough of that in the world already to slow us down. So just trust yourself. Don't believe your thoughts. That's not trust. What is trust? Good question. Thank you. Trust is whatever is arising. Don't trust what arises. But if you need that relative kind of thing, well, I just have to, like I say, trust yourself. I say trust the space in which everything occurs. The space in which things occur doesn't do anything but just accommodate. It's the most generous form of hospitality there is. Whatever arises, just be a good host, hostess, hoster. Did I finish my answer? Do you have a question?
Of all the precepts, which is the most important?
Well, I think people might take exception in some areas, but I would say be with all things. The Bodhisattva vow. It's difficult to do that without refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dharma, refuge in the Sangha. So all of them come together. I think being with all things, the last of the three pure precepts. If you're with all things, then you're not at war, so you can't do any harm. If you're with all things, then you're supporting whatever is arising insofar as it needs your help. But because you're clear about what you're seeing, you're not hoodwinked by propaganda. You see it, and what follows the propaganda that you see is not judgment. It's just you just see it. You don't need to judge something that's obviously difficult or confusing or harmful to people. You don't have to do anything with it at all. Just don't fuel it. So go.
What is the function of a precept?
To give you a hard time. To give you something to conceptually, because the ego mind is constantly using various forms, structures of concepts, thinking, pushing, pulling, evaluating, judging, condemning, looking away, sorting out, finding things here, grabbing those things, throw them away, elevate the other things. It's a Coney Island of the mind. It's a three-ring circus, one of those other metaphors. So round and around, here we go this way, here we go that way. So the precept is something that has the nature of discursive thought, thinking, evaluating, judging. And it goes in because it comes out of awareness, out of Buddha nature, out of the Buddha's teachings, comes in and takes that situation, like the three jewels, refuge in the Buddha as the example of someone who's sane, refuge in the Dharma as the truth that the Buddha taught. Everything is dependently arisen. There are no two things anywhere. And refuge in the Sangha, or the community of people who are trying to cooperate, trying to communicate, trying to cooperate, trying to collaborate together without stepping on each other's toes, literally. So, but probably be with all things, because that covers everything. You're not for anything, you're not against anything, you're certainly not looking away or ignoring anything. And you could say, well, what if something really bad happens? Shouldn't you stop or step into it, or shouldn't you interfere, or shouldn't you join something that's really a good, uplifting, quality, highfalutin movement? Let it falute for a while. Give it some time. Don't do anything unless you have to. Join nothing. Don't join this. There's nothing to join here. There's no membership. People who are ordained or wearing a rakusu have not joined anything. Sometimes it's taught that way. Welcome to the family of the Buddha and so on like that. But there isn't anybody that isn't a family of awakening. Shoto.
It's not joining something. What's the metaphor of using this as glue?
Refuge. It's you. You're taking refuge in your Buddha nature. Just looks like something else. It's your Buddha nature. You're the one who needs to awaken. It looks like there's lots of people, doesn't it? Looks like there's some smart people. Me. Some dumb people. You. You're welcome. So, no, I'm just saying that it looks like there's this and that. There's up and on, back and forth, right and wrong. We're flooded with it all the time. And highly erudite, highly intelligent, highly competent, educated people are using those kinds of, it's correct, it's incorrect, and arguing with each other and trying to come to some kind of a conclusion sometimes of what is this about? What is going on? Who should we blame, or who should we credit, or what should we do, and so on. There's way too much looking for something to conclude rather than looking for something that's fundamentally the truth. If you're looking for conclusions, you're going to cover up the truth. This is what a conclusion does. No more investigation. It's a highly polished form of ignorance. This doesn't mean you can't conclude, but the conclusion should come out to be, in order to be balanced, in order to be about communication, about equanimity, it should come out of your insight into the situation. If it's coming out of your insight into the situation, then it's choiceless. You see, you've been looking at the polarity for long enough without weighing them. You're just looking at it, and then you see what needs to be fueled or helped or supported, and you see what needs to be discarded or kicked off the porch. So that kind of aggression is not exactly plus and minus, or I hate that kind of aggression, or going against or going to war. It's it may not even show up with as much energy at all. It just may be removing the fuel source of the negativity that you're seeing. Yes.
Something you said reminded me of book study, and you talk about how it's not to understand anything. If we notice that we might relatively have a better grip on concepts,
yeah,
should we endeavor to understand less?
No, No, that's only so the important thing about book study or any kind of study is that you do it, not that you have a certain kind of conclusion. That's a different kind of, that's why they give people tests to force you to think in a linear way, because that's the only thing they can measure. You can't measure. The only way they presume to measure high intelligence or genius outside of that is something that you do that other people can't do. Yes.
Thinking of my job, like I'm basically training people to do that, to take those
Yes.
tests. Is there a way to bring in the other kind of understanding into that situation?
You do it. Teach no one. Don't teach unless you have to. Don't teach unless you're absolutely, it's choiceless. You have to teach. Teach mundane knowledge, of course. And then as you work, as you practice, that will start to come through effortlessly. And people won't even know they're receiving that kind of a teaching. Doesn't make you some kind of magical wizard or something. I'm not going to give you that credit. But your own understanding, your own equanimity, your own sense of balance, and you could say fairness about things will start to show up without you even trying to be fair or trying to live up to a philosophy or psychology or just being with all things. When you have a student, you're just with them. They need to learn certain things so that they can operate and function in the world of materialism, which is what this world is mainly. Help them. Help people where they're at. Meet people where they're at. If somebody needs a shoe, get them a shoe. Don't get them 2 shoes. It's too much. You're assuming they don't already have another shoe. And for sure, don't get a, if they ask for a shoe, don't teach them how to meditate. They didn't ask you that. Was that funny? No, it was very funny. So what I'm saying there is you can't really fundamentally help somebody who's very confused, having a difficult time with their life or whatever is going on with them, who are not practitioners, are not meditators, not interested in training your minds in any way, if you don't first respect their confusion. You have to be respectful of people's confusion, not immediately start pointing it out to them. That's their discovery to find that out, not yours. Choo-choo.
How do we observe the first brave precept of don't kill, particularly in relation to our diet?
So, as I've said, when the time I first started teaching, you're going to have to kill something if you're going to live. And the selectivity about that some people do about say, well, I'm only going to kill things that have eyes. This is just, what's that word, Sanskrit word, bullshit? Yeah, I think that works pretty good. It's bullshit. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that it's a misunderstanding of dependent origination. It's just a misunderstanding. It's very difficult to understand pratitya samutpada, dependent, that nothing comes of its own side as a separate thing. We are not disconnected from anything anywhere. And I sometimes relatively say, how do you think a celery feels when they hear you say that? It starts to, do I have eyes? Yeah, I have eyes, but you can't find them because the eyes of celery are everywhere. And I'm not just being romantic about it. More?
It seems like there are a lot of ideas and theories that are very convincing.
Yes.
How can we, does observing that precept look like just looking at those theories?
So there's a reason we say observe the precepts. The reason my Zen master said you don't take precepts, you observe them. You don't obey precepts. This is not theism. It's an ancient practice of awareness. So you need to, however that precept arises for you, no taking life precept, not to interrupt the mandal of the present moment. There's no taking life precept. But you have to see the mandal of the present moment, because if it's only your perception of the mandal of the present moment, you're going to think some things are worth more than other things. And you're going to think you can abuse this thing, but not this thing. This is a misunderstanding. and it's rampant. When I say it's rampant, it means it's rampant around. A lot of it. Everybody's got it. Some people got more than others. More.
How can we actually observe without using the concept of observing to let ourselves off the hook?
What's the hook? I'm not sure what I'm following. Let ourselves off the hook.
If we say,
I was on the hook. Want me to interrupt you again? Finish your question, sorry.
if I say, well, I'm going to eat meat, but I'm observing that I'm eating meat. It seems like there can be a sticky situation where I'm giving myself permission, or I'm giving myself permission to look away. Basically.
Don't chatter about it. Don't justify anything. This is what justification is. You're covering up what you're actually doing so you don't have to be responsible for what you're doing. But you have to be responsible for the entire situation. Entire situation. That means don't just believe. You never ask. I say this constantly over and over again. There's nothing to believe here. If you're believing Buddhism, then you're not practicing Buddhism. And I'm not saying there aren't possibly millions of people who believe Buddhism. It's just a misunderstanding. Nothing here to believe. Go ahead.
You brought up, I don't know if it's Kobin's translation, but to not interrupt the mandala of the present moment. And you said we have to see the present moment, or the mandala.
You have to see the mandala.
How do we see that?
You see how you keep interrupting it. To start with, and people will separate this out because they don't want to hear it this way. They'd rather hear it in a way that they can control it. And trying to stop your thought patterns is killing your thoughts. Thoughts are just like living beings. They just have a different dynamic than something that's breathing.
Do the relative structures of precepts ever drop away?
Give me an example of where your question is coming from.
I guess just to use the diet as the example, if we're looking at a particular structure that we're relating to of what's harmful or what's helpful, does that ever cease to function in that way?
Damn, I know. Maybe. It certainly hasn't stopped over here.
So what's the awareness of note-taking life?
Well, if you can help it, don't kill anything. Don't interrupt anything, and don't interrupt, but also don't interrupt other people's insanity, because things are dependently arisen. So someone's apparent existence is dependent on lots of things that are totally invisible. Tributary streams flowing in the darkness. We can't even see our own situation yet. We're so ready quite often to jump into somebody else's life and give them advice on something. And so I would say don't do that. On the other hand, if you're asked, someone asks you about it, then you might have some permission to make a suggestion to that person. It's very difficult to work with that and not fall into right and wrong. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's doing it right? Who's doing it wrong? These people should clean up their act and judge others and so on. Yeah.
Can you have a structure that you function out of without going into the right or wrong?
That's what the precepts are about. The way I understand them and the way I teach them. You have to look at the polarities, but the polarities they get their meaning from each other. You can't have death without life. You can't have life without death. But quite often, what was sometimes called senseless murder, as if there's murder that makes sense, of people that comes out of intense hatred and ignorance. And quite often the hatred is about oneself, that one projects out on the world and hates others, quite often called prejudice. We hate, just hate. Anytime any negative feeling comes up, in order to get rid of that feeling, we put it out there and then accuse and try to get others to join in. And if we have a powerful charisma, personality, or whatever, we might be able to sway a lot of people, take whole nations to war. It's just been going on and on and on. Just the history of, as far as it goes back, it's just war after war after war. War and peace, war and peace. I say don't go to war, don't go to peace. Don't do either one. Don't do anything. Sit down, in our situation, sit down, hold still, train your mind. See that polarity happen and see that you're not separate from it.
What is the difference between going to right or wrong and not doing harm?
Say more.
Well, one of the other precepts is don't do harm. So how do we determine what's harmful? And doesn't that fall into the category of right and wrong then?
So I don't, we can't help but look at some kind of a standard, but just don't set them up. They'll track you down if they need you, and it'll start to show up in your awareness about, well, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. Fire's hot, water's wet. Wind moves, earth is hard. And there's some things that are not opinions. And so that kind of an understanding. So the way that I often talk about it is don't interfere with others in whatever they're doing, whatever's happening, without their permission. They tell you what they do, then stay with them, communicate with them, and cooperate. Not cooperate to, help me kill my mother, kind of thing. Don't cooperate to that extent. There's a lot of room there.
Is it possible to know ahead of time whether we're causing harm?
I don't think you're going to get some kind of an operator's manual for that. The causes and conditions are so complicated, and this is why the thought patterns that arise in the mind tend to reinforce the self-centeredness, and we're magnetized into taking this track or stopping this or starting this. We want to manipulate things. This is why sitting down facing a wall is so valuable, because over time, we watch that mechanism work over and over and over without doing anything with it. That's why it seems to be necessary to have a teaching person help you, because every person I talk to is working with their difficulty or their confusion or their misunderstanding or their just out and out suffering in a totally different way. It's like every time I meet somebody, I don't see it quite that way. I'm not seeing it quite like that. Important to meet people and help them. And how do you help them? Maybe all you can do is just be with them. Maybe they're not really ready to hear anything else. And if you're clear, you'll be there with that. I mean, if you're clear about what's happening with you, there's no longer any internal skirmishes going on. Or if they are, they're not believed in. Because sometimes you can't stop skirmishes, so they're coming out of the ancient past. Sometimes they're things that you brought into this lifetime because of causes and conditions. And you never can necessarily meditate them away. But if you have a deep understanding of what this is, you don't care if they're there or not, because you're no longer differentiating between what happens in here and what happens out there. The quality of sameness and difference, Sandokai. It's both different and it's the same. And the ego mind, by that kind of understanding, it can't get any nourishment from that kind of understanding. And it starts to freak out. And people who run into that conventionally, just because of causes and conditions, suddenly stumble into reality, shall we say, or no separation, immediately go to a psychiatrist or a doctor or a therapist or need medication because the intensity is so powerful. Because ego is so threatened and we think we are somebody. But one who is clear, threats come and go all the time, all day long. They just don't happen to a person. There's no one who's threatened. The threat can come. All the doors are open. All the windows are open. They come in, hang out, look for somebody, can't find anybody, and they go somewhere else. And sometimes they're the one that's sitting right next to you. It's coming from them. Showed up.
How do we interrupt the monologue of the present moment?
Well, there's probably lots of ways of doing it. The simple way is trying to change who you are into somebody else, not willing to be genuine, which can be misunderstood as, well, I just got to be me. I need to blow my stack and throw dishes across the room. You know, some kind of validation of your anger, validation of your grasping, your passion, or validation of your ignoring, turning away, the three poisons. The present moment is just very simple, ordinary, and flat, beige, unless it turns bright red. And then it gets all jagged around the edges, growls at you. Is that helpful? Apparently not. Go ahead.
It's really confusing trying to look at that with dependent origination, it seems like.
Dependent origination is a description of paratantra, or of the way things are basically before anything is said, before anything is added onto it, before anything is imputed, before anything is even named. It's just a fundamental situation. And probably in ancient times, people didn't feel separate from anything. Even there's some stories in the indigenous people of this country and other countries they looked at the world as being a part of them, rather than they're individuals who can just do anything they want on the land or the trees or the animals. I wasn't there, at least I don't remember being there, but that's how it looks.
How can we perceive consciousness in celery?
You don't have to. Can't even perceive consciousness in Danny. She's your wife. Did you ever notice him perceiving your consciousness? Would you like to perceive your consciousness once in a while? So what's showing up there is there's a presumption about what consciousness is, and we don't really know. Science wants to go in and say what it is, and they'll point to little flashes of light in your brain. These are the synapses. As soon as they give it a name, you got something here. And then this happens here, and if you poke a needle here, you suddenly remember the first carrot you ever ate. We're making progress. Now I got to put all that together. They want a lot of materialistic, a lot of any kind of a practice. Quite often it's about getting control. Meditation is not free from that, trying to get control. I teach it the other way around. The only control you need is get your butt into the zendo, into the meditation room, in front of a wall, sit down and hold still. There's your control. Good enough. And then from there on, whatever is happening, just watch it come and go and don't move. And over time, maybe a long time, you will begin to see the nature of your mind, the nature of dependent origination, and the nature of the five skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept, consciousness, or memory and consciousness. You'll be able to see how that functions to get together to say me. And when you see it fall apart, you still have a form, you still have perception, you still have feeling, you still have concepts or thinking, you still have the six sense fields and their objects, but they don't get together and make an individual, even though there's a apparent singular organism here called a human being. So consciousness is, you could say, is we're born like what happened to Rumi. He was doing just fine, and suddenly he was born. Look at the look on his face. Not happy. Except sometimes he gets happy. So it's just a way of talking about it. I don't know how the hell it works. I mean, I don't think anyone knows, like, well, here's how consciousness works. There are a lot of people speculating on it. But it looks like it's, to use the contemporary metaphor for downloading, it looks like consciousness downloads into a human being, into a form. And from the exploration that we've done in deep consciousness, it looks like it can happen right away. It looks like a baby could be born before the consciousness enters. Sometimes in the West called a soul, we would call it consciousness only, or we would call it Buddha nature. And that may need to go through some karmic tribulation before there's a basic understanding of one's true nature. Sokuzan.
How can we respect dependent origination when we don't see equanimity, when things look different?
Just continue. I mean, you can describe it that way. Tells me, as the person you're asking the question of, the way that you're already looking at it. And so it's like the way that the question appears to me is you're on the side of a mountain. It's covered with snow. You have your skis on backwards. Remember that? No. You have your skis on backwards, and you're about halfway up, and you turn around and say, with the same kind of tone of voice, how do I get to the top of the mountain? I would say, turn your skis around and then ski uphill. Follow that metaphor? It's a powerful metaphor. It's very seldom I'm that creative or forgetful. Other questions? Jessica.
What does it look like to see people's confusion and Buddha nature at the same time?
Looks like they're not separate. It doesn't look like two different things. And also seeing that one doesn't feel like necessarily feel like they're fundamentally separate from you or separate from anything else. So seeing no separation is not an experience. And you can be in the midst of that kind of understanding, that kind of wisdom, and still be a mess. I mean, still be having terrible difficulty and suffering. And unless there's been some mind training, we tend to grasp onto that suffering and evaluate ourselves out of just like a knee-jerk reaction. I'm just doing terrible. This must be doing something wrong. I need to stop meditating. I need to go back and see my therapist. I'm not going to talk to that meditation teacher anymore. Or I need to sit longer. I need to sit with my eyes closed. I need to. We're constantly shopping for something. So you might be having tremendous insight right in the middle of confusion. And that's even more confusing, to have the insight at the same time. You know, you're not thinking clearly, or you're thinking aggressively, or with one of the three poisons or the five kleshas, greed or avarice or something is coming up in the midst of this clarity. So the message there is telling you literally, with the example, not two. Good and evil are not two. Life and death are not two. They are also not one. That's why it's because you can't go in there with some kind of a logical situation, although the existentialists in Germany and France tried to do that a century ago. What they wrote was pretty cool, but it wasn't what the Buddha saw 2,500 years ago. Yes.
Sanju, If you realize that
Yes.
who you are can't be threatened,
Mhm.
does the feeling of being threatened go away?
Not necessarily, but there's no one to be threatened. So you still may have the fear of that, but it can't there's no Velcro there anymore. So we all know what it's like to have a fear come up and think, I don't want that. I want to get rid of that. I'm going to go to bed, or I'm going to sleep. I'm going to take some meds, or what, all the different ways, I'm going to go out and jog and see if I can run it off, exercise it away. I mean, there's so many different things. And what is being said from this point of view is don't do anything with it, but look at it. Look at it with all of your senses. Smell it, hear it, taste it, touch it. Be with that. Be with all things. And this is your opportunity when that arises. If you're going to help others, then you need to work with your own passion, aggression, your own fear directly. And you could say boldly. Otherwise, when other people come to you with their shelf of spoiled food, you'll know what to do. You'll know how to help them where they are, rather than come up with some kind of dumb formulas about this or that or the other thing. And you being a therapist, this is why it's so important for you to make time to train your mind to sit down, look at the wall as much as you can, and join study groups. Further question about that? Good question. Fundamentally, it's hard to help anyone else, and it's even harder to not interfere with anybody else and make things worse. But if you can just be with somebody without making things worse for them, then that's, what's that? Do no harm. Don't do bad things. That's one of the precepts. I can't remember which one. Yes.
Jim Johnson from Muskegon has
Jim.
a two-part question. He says, or asks, seeing the seemingly cyclical nature of history and becoming aware that events seem to point to arising suffering, is wanting to stop that suffering interrupting the mandala of the present moment?
Not necessarily. Wanting to stop it is just thoughts about it just arising. But turning that into, jumping into your jogging pants and heading out with your protest sign or with whatever it may be, that could be extra, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. If someone is training their mind and is clear, I've had people that I've worked with. It's been a while, but had people I've worked with that said, I can't come to the meditation or the Dharma talk today because I have to go protest fracking in a particular city. I have to do that. I'm totally in favor of that. There's no, I would say certainly. And that would show up in any direction. If somebody knows they need to do something, it really doesn't matter too much if it's based on some kind of clamping down, or because it's not about changing your behavior, my friends. It is about being aware of it. Now, I'm not saying he was completely aware of what he was doing, but it would have made it more difficult for me to come and say, well, you really would do better to sit and face the wall and save all beings by facing the wall. Feed him that kind of baloney. He wasn't ready for that. It's not that doesn't save all beings, but it doesn't do that if there's some kind of forced feeding happening where you're making yourself do this. Bodhisattva vow is not some kind of forced march. So in my situation, my understanding is I have no idea what kind of karma, what that man, I can't think of his name now, what he was dealing with that brought him into even in front of this situation, of the teaching situation, or took him out because he had to go and protest that the greedy people are destroying the planet. I think about doing such a terrible situation. I think about doing things all the time that are other than what we're doing here. And sometime I don't show up, I'll leave you a note. But I won't necessarily try to mobilize you to do it. What do I mobilize you to do? Nothing. Train your mind. That's the main teaching from this old man. Sit down, hold still, find out who you are before the body mind goes back into the earth, into the water, into the fire, into the air, into the space, into consciousness. Find out before this goes back into the elements. Karan.
Does it matter if you find out before it goes back into the elements?
The way you're asking the question, I would say not really. The way you're asking the question doesn't matter. The mattering part is, that's kind of a politics of experience. We don't need that. It's like if someone comes to me and says, I see what you're saying, but I don't really want to change my mind. I would say, well, good luck. Go ahead.
What's the benefit of doing that before the body-mind dissolves?
So this is my way of understanding it, and then don't believe a word I say. I mean, since you're here, so you might as well listen. But when the body-mind collapses, you don't go anywhere because you're not a body. So, and then depending on the causes and conditions that brought you into this manifestation, into this limited realm, this low-frequency realm called physical existence, this is a journey that doesn't stop. It's never started because it's not a relative situation. You could call it your spirit. You could call it your consciousness. Your Buddha nature continues on some level in some way or shape or form, however you want to say that. You might never become a human being again. You might never come into this realm again. Death comes without warning. This body will be a corpse. At that time, the Dharma will be my only help. I must practice it. Go ahead.
It seems like the way you're framing it, that it's like a linear process.
It's what?
That it's like a linear process.
Yeah.
Like,
it's not. I talk about it linear, but as soon as the body mind drops, time vanishes. So does space. But if I say to you, yeah, not surprised. So that space that we together, not just me, but together, we created that in a realm that is without time and space. There's a kind of space there, but it's not this space. It's not this space. And there is a kind of a time there, but it's not the time of here it is, then time goes by and now it's over here. That doesn't happen because it can be both places at once. It can be not there at all. It's like a lucid dream. If you had a lucid dream, you notice that everything is very spongy in that area. It's like you can just about, once you realize what that is, it might have things. More?
yeah, but I don't.
Well, that comes up. Yes.
A question from Sokuzan up in Traverse City.
Who's that? Oh,
She's right
I
there.
remember. Yeah, that's a Tiger Mountain.
She asks, how can we be of benefit, cause no harm, and be with all things when we need to eat in a situation where living beings are commonly tortured in insane ways to provide food for profit?
Don't torture them. And also be very careful of stepping into somebody else's territory. You cannot see the dependent origination that is behind those beings who are abusing animals. For you to step in there and try to end that like that is a misunderstanding of dependent origination. It's just a misunderstanding. It's not wrong. You're just misunderstanding the desire to help, the wish to save all beings, to lessen the suffering of living beings is genuine. But how you go about that, be very careful. First, work with your own suffering and make sure that you're not pushing that out onto the world and ending it out there instead of in yourself or seeing what it is here. Dependent origination is not biased. Human beings are the ones that come along and say, well, I don't eat anything that has eyes. This is just, what was that Sanskrit word? I forget. That's a way of actually getting out of responsibility for what's right in front of you, which is incredibly powerful movement of things that come into existence and pass out of existence. Billions and billions. Even Buddhism talks about endless worlds coming into existence for a little while and then flashing out of existence. And to separate out and try to make yourself some kind of special person is a misunderstanding. It's not wrong. It's just you may not be ready to have a deeper understanding that is completely responsible for everything. Everything. You're responsible for everything I'm saying. Doesn't mean you're to blame. Doesn't mean you get credit. But you have to respond to it. You have to respond to what is happening out of your understanding. When you respond to it, don't add to it. It's wrong. Don't add to it. It's right. Don't add to it. Should be, shouldn't be. Any of the additions on there, unless it comes out of the awareness. And how will you know it comes out of the awareness? Because you will be able to think without thinking. They won't arise as your thoughts. They'll just arise. Sokuzan.
What is responding if not an addition?
So what you're referring to is when I say don't add?
You just said to respond, but not to add.
So when I say respond, I mean, how I don't know how else to do it other than to say, just receive whatever's happening. If you make a comment on it, you cover it up. If you push on it, you cover it up. If you pull on it or explain it or do anything with it, you cover it up. If you distract yourself with it, you cover it up. Do nothing with it. Just respond to it. And the response is just observe, just receive what's coming your way. The most powerful form of generosity, as I say over and over again, is give. And what do you give? Give everything your attention from now on. Don't miss anything. And that doesn't mean if you notice that you've missed anything, that you missed that. If you noticed you missed something, you haven't missed it. You can ask questions about that if you want. Or continue in the line you're in. It's about being responsible, not feeling some kind of power and control over yourself, or at least people will say, well, at least I'm willing to take responsibility for my actions. But that yard bird over there is always blaming everybody else. It's a way of twisting everything out. That would be the extreme version of it. More?
So what are we responsible for then?
Everything. Because it's not separate. But as long as you separate yourself out as some individual person who can win as other people are losing, who can be smart as other people are not so smart, and keep separating yourself out of division, then the responsibility is not complete. It's more like a preference, buying into preferences. And it's not that we don't like sunshine over storm clouds. Of course we see that, but it's more of a contrast situation than something that's right or wrong or better or worse. I'm just using that because that's a fairly strong contrast that doesn't really have a good and evil context to it. And when somebody is, take it a little bit further, when somebody is attacking, going and hurting someone else, it's because they're trying, this is how they get rid of their suffering. Somebody's suffering intensely. It depends on how that's wired up with causes and conditions in one's own karma, one's own life. Quite often, the one who's having the difficulties is the one who's trying to attack someone else because they can't take, they're so unhappy, so miserable. They've tried stuffing it, that doesn't work. So now it's down there bubbling away, and as soon as they find some kind of a trigger out here that triggers an area in them, I'm using a physical metaphor, some area that's never been investigated because they've stuffed it. They don't want to look at that. And it could be due to the way they were treated when they were 3 years old. It could be the way that they treated somebody else in the 13th century. Not separate. And I don't believe or disbelieve in rebirth. I'm certainly not going to look away from it, but I wouldn't know what I believe there because it doesn't actually work in a, like you're saying, in a linear way. It's not linear. You can remember the future. According to Lewis Carroll, and through the looking glass. Who did he put those words in there? What character said it's a poor memory that doesn't remember in both directions? It doesn't remember the future. reads Lewis Carroll. Nobody remembers reading Lewis Carroll. That's better. Further question? One more question, and we'll close. Yes.
What does it mean to create art in response to suffering?
Well, it could be lots of things. Someone could be making things in order to just ignore some kind of difficulty that's probably going to sneak up on them at 3 a.m, or at some other time, or show up in another way. So it could be a way of shoving down or repressing the situation, or it could be a way of I think it would be so different with each person. Person could be making art and using the energy of that difficulty. It could be what's called Trungpa Rinpoche called transmuting emotion into creativity. It's just energy, but that doesn't feel like crap. But it's energy. If any of you have interest, he has quite a few books on Dharma art. Mayun has who was it that gave Mayun some Trungpa Rinpoche's Dharma art teachings? I don't know. Anyway, I know she has those. But so I think there's a whole series of CDs, and then of course there's regular books on Dharma art by Trungpa Rinpoche. And have you read any of those?
I have
not. No, you do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. One more.
Chiyazan says it's the queen in Through the Looking Glass.
Smart ass. It's the queen. He is correct. It is the queen. I get to be the one that says he's correct. So, anyway, thank you, my friends.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit at the back of our red tip books. I'd like to remind everybody about the donation boxes in the hallway. Also, we accept donations gladly through PayPal or your debit and credit card. We always appreciate, however, you can financially help us. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Kyo san shi shi son nu sa mo ko sa mo ko ja ho mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.